Awesome. Welcome to this week's Substrate Sync. We've got actually a lot on the agenda this week, so I figured we'd kick it off. I guess, Ben, you've put the first item on, which is like how to track batch changes for 1.0 release, which is like the milestone. Or some of the milestone, but yeah.
Maybe that was a poor way of phrasing it, and maybe a better question is to ask exactly what we mean by this notion of batch changes. If I'm understanding what was being discussed in that one issue, is the idea basically if we want to make a change, we might introduce a new field, mark the old one as deprecated, but then just leave it be until 1.0, at which point we delete the deprecated field? Is that kind of the idea of batch changes?
Well, it's possible to create a branch and put stuff in a branch. Then you can make massive changes like, we're gonna renumber everything. It makes sense. Something like that. That's stuff you probably need to do in a branch.
Okay, that was the other thing I was going to maybe suggest on this call, with to have a main bulk branch outside of the normal. I don't know what it would be called, but
but the only problem with going with a branch is how long is it going to be till we hit that branch?
That's what I'm thinking about.
If it's gonna be three months, maybe that's okay. If it's gonna be 5 to unknown, that's probably not. That's less interesting.
You say because it will just be all of that time maintaining this branch that's not being used because we'll have to constantly rebase and that kind of thing. Okay.
Or we just make all the changes in the new branch and make no changes in the regular one. We don't have any branching issues. It just means that you can't use the new changes unless you're willing to jump to the branch. It's just not necessarily a bad thing. It's just going to be very difficult to have your substrate go depend on the branch.
Yeah, and I think thinking about the 1.0 stuff, I think it makes sense to eventually batch like all the field renames and or not the field renames, but all the renumberings and stuff to like make it nice. That might make sense to do as a bulk. I do still think it makes sense in practice to do slow deprecations, like with the URN stuff. We should remove that like before 1.0. Because I think part of what I'm worried about is if we batch up a lot of like we're gonna break a bunch of stuff when we go 1.0, that migration is a lot more painful versus like you can migrate before 1.0 and then 1.0 is just like, hey, some of the fields changed names. So there's no major functionality stuff. It's like the cleanup before we release. Like that might be a nicer experience overall than it's like everything is different. A bunch of fields are gone, and it's just a bigger burden potentially.
So, good.
I was gonna toss out two thoughts, or a couple thoughts anyway. One, I don't understand the idea of renumbering, so I'm gonna put that out there. Like, other than just being OCD about it, it's like, who cares? In terms of removing old fields, I think that we can come up with something that is like, we don't have to religiously follow a certain versioning pattern right now. I mean, I think pre 1.0. It's kind of like everything can break all the time. That's the traditional pre 1.0 kind of pattern. And so if something is existing, if like we removed a feature 6 months ago and we've kept the field around for the last 6 months, we can just say, hey, after 6 months, let's just remove the old field, right? And to kind of go to Victor's point, which was like having like 75 fields removed all at once. If someone is working with our stuff downstream, is actually much more disruptive, I think, than if like 2 disappear this week and then next week 5 disappear and another would 3 weeks later 4 disappear. Because each of those times it's painful because you have more time you're going to have to upgrade. And if you do upgrade across, skip 3 versions, then you're going to hit that sort of like, oh, the bunch of fields changed at once, or disappeared at once. But I think that if we have fields that I'm sure that there are fields that we refactored 15 months ago that we can just delete.
Yeah.
I think that, and so I'd be open to having conversations about that, not being super like rigid about exactly the moment that we delete them. I don't want to be like
Even-
CalSite. If you guys have worked with CalSite, like it has notes about like this is deprecated from like 10 years ago.
As an example of something that I can think of we want to remove is like the grouping expressions and aggregates have the old deprecator form and the new form. We've been slowly upgrading a bunch of the libraries to handle the new form, and most of them can handle both now. Like once we do that, we should just get rid of the old form. And I think the argument I'd make is I'm actually like we should remove things more proactively. As long as I think having them coexist for a couple of releases is useful because like, well, in the case where you don't actually care about sending plans over the wire, it's like one system, then like you can just straight upgrade. Once you start communicating plans across the languages, it is nice to be like, these both exist, you can dual write them for a bit and you can handle them. But like if it's like, okay, these specific releases are compatible and you haven't been updating, so like you have to do this, get rid of this, and then you can move forward to more releases. I think that's as long as there's a path forward where like you don't have to like simultaneously upgrade two ends of your system at once. Like if you structure our deprecations like that and then remove things, I think that's totally reasonable. And that makes 1.0 like makes the 1.0 release easier because it's mostly just like, okay, maybe some field renames or something. And maybe not renumberings if we don't care about being that OCD about it.
So it sounds like one interpretation then is the only thing we would batch or consider batching would be things like field renames, which don't impact the on the wire content, but are just kind of a little bit annoying to deal with in the libraries. Is that correct? Or
Well, and you have other things like messages being like duplicate join type messages with numbers that are completely identical. So getting them all on the same join type and making one join type message instead of having each individual join type, having multiple copies of the join type is one of the things that we want to have fixed.
Do we?
Yeah, I think it's worth doing. It's really
Many
obnoxious
people
and
have
much
complained
license.
about it.
Yeah, agree.
And actually now with dialects, you can control the specific join supports these specific join types. And you can use the dialect to refine that.
My suggestion on that kind of thing would be to like then do the same thing we do anywhere else. Right? It's like new join type field on the relations that are now pointing to the grouped one, deprecate the old one, and then like, in 2 months we delete the old one.
I think
Right?
I had
Like
a
we
PR
don't
out to
like
do that
I
a
don't
while
think
ago,
that is a batch change either. I actually think that we should I didn't see the comments about batch changes, so I'm kind of catching up here. But I think that at best we can, we should just avoid those. Because I think that they are just hard. Like it takes coordination. Like it's like the inverse of like a distributed version control system.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Where like we like what are there actually think like what are the things that we would 100% need to be batch changes, and if they don't have to be, we should do a slow migration. Because also trying to get all the libraries in sync for a 1.0 release simultaneously will be the whole thing.
Then does that mean like we are basically front loading all these like potential deprecations as early as possible, and then spread out the actual deprecation through like following like I don't know like 6 months or 12 months, and then once we all clear, then we declare victory and go for 1.0 in a clean state.
I don't know that I would. I don't think about it that way. Like I kind of feel like, hey, if we think that we're far enough away from that change that we can remove the field, like the 1.0 thing to me is a little bit of a red herring, because I'm like kind of like, hey, if we made this change and we're far enough away that we feel like, hey, all the libraries now handle the new thing, we know that most of the applications we're aware of are upgraded to handle the new thing, just remove the old thing. So it doesn't have. I don't even know that it needs to be super rigid. It's like 6 months or 12 months.
Yeah.
But I'm not suggesting that we're trying to front load things per se. I actually think that my experience in open source projects is things just take longer because everybody has multiple agendas and different agendas, because they're working for a professional company and they got other things to do. And so my guess is that if we just don't, we do the opposite of what maybe like the concept of batch changes kind of feels like you're pushing things off. I'm like, let's just get stuff done that we think we need to get done, And odds are by the time we get to the point where we're like, yeah, I think we're ready for 1.0, we actually got all our stuff done. Like most of those things will be removed just through sort of natural progress.
Mm.
Yeah. Like a 1.0 thing might be before we announce 1.0 is that we should remove all deprecated fields in the API. But the 1.0 switch is like, cool, this is already gone. Now it's just we're stabilizing it to be like 1.0.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we can.
It's like, yeah.
Young Chul doesn't seem like he's very impressed by that.
Was that?
I was like, it sounded like Young Chul was not super impressed with that idea. Maybe I misinterpreted his noise.
I think maybe I don't know. I know maybe it's Microsoft. We never deprecate anything. But no, I'm
No,
not gonna put words in your. I'm not gonna put tangents into your noises.
Hey, don't be throwing Microsoft barbs. At least we don't have a big Oracle here, right?
Right. Yeah.
No, just kidding.
It's yeah. I'm actually on more like just go for like follow the cutting edge side. So, but I mean, as long as like we can set a clear guideline, like for instance, like 6 months, like we just leave the deprecate like 6 months, and then after 6 months mark, like we just go clean it. If that just happens, then I think I'm okay with it.
It actually might be good to include in policy, like how do we handle deprecations and removals? And I do have I guess might bump to the next topic, which is sort of related to this.
Or
which is like, go ahead.
Victor, like one more thing. So, or maybe 6 months is like too, I don't know, maybe too harsh. Then we need to at least have some sort of like guideline, like what are the major like consumer of the substrate, and how many of them are actually supporting like certain things. Once we tick like most of the major consumers, then we can actually declare deprecation. I mean, that could be like another criteria on deprecation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I also say that on our end, the Substrate Go and Substrate Java tend to be pretty up to date with new stuff because we're using them actively.
Mm-hmm.
My follow-up question is, do we know who's using Substrate Python and Substrate C++? Because anyone here
is used by DocDB.
Because
Oh,
the
no,
DocDB
that's not
folks
right.
are using it.
No, they just use the proto messages, huh, David? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't think people use the proto messages. There are some people that are actually using all of subs, because they come along and they have changes. But I don't think in general. I don't know what I would want people to use out of Substrate CPP. The text format is nice, but I'm still trying to move that into a separate package in Rust. And there's then all the type stuff, and I'm not sure that stuff is great at being reused. I almost would like just just use your own protobus, but don't use Substrate CPP sometimes.
Okay, so if it's just a protobus, that's worth. I think part of what we're thinking about it from on our end is that I think Ben's been doing the canonical URN stuff, and he's fixed Substrate Go and Substrate Java. And we don't really use Substrate Python or Substrate C++ that much, and we're not sure who's using it. So we can potentially help with doing like if no one's actually depending on it in like a hard way, we could just switch to making them use URNs. But we've been trying to figure out like who would be impacted by this. And also, like, to be honest, like we're not the biggest C++ house and the biggest Python house for that kind of stuff. So if someone was using it, we might want to work with them to be like, hey, you should upgrade this to use canonical URN so we can get rid of it. But that's what I was asking. And that kind of comes up to the deprecation thing of like, as we add new stuff, the old libraries are kind of baked into existing behaviors. And if no one owns them, they're just going to get out of date. And maybe that's fine. And at some point, someone's going to want to use it. And they'll be like, cool, it's out of date because no one has been relying on it. And maybe that might be a good thing to call out on the website. It's like which libraries are used by which companies, just to be like, not so much which are supported as much as like which are seeing active development and are likely to be up to date.
One thing to contribute, though, which we spoke about earlier, Victor, is at least Substrate Python. There is at least one person who has said that they want it updated to do this URN stuff. So That at least seems like confirmation, and it is not someone on this call. It's Niels something.
He's brought on. He's
And
been on the call before.
okay, and so we at least have one user of the Substrate Python repository, and then one further complexity is Substrate C++ is a submodule of Substrate Python. I don't fully understand the relationship between the two. I think that it's just using maybe the text thing that you were talking about, David, that helps renders plans in some way to make it easier to use for tests or something. I'm not.
It was supposed to be. It was supposed to pull the text format in at one point, but I don't think that actually happened. I'm surprised that it actually is a submodule. Maybe I partially put it in to make it a submodule so that I could implement the. I would bet we probably could remove the CPP submodule from Python.
Okay, that would be the happiest path, because especially if Substrate CPP languishes a little bit, it would be better for Substrate Python to not have an attachment to something that might not get updated. So
the biggest problem is we weren't able to release the Substrates Python with the submodule in C++. We weren't able to release the Python package to the distribution center. And that was, I think, the one thing that ended up holding it all up. So yeah, so I don't whatever it is, it's partially connected.
okay,
Yeah, so it sounds like we have a lead on the Substrate Python user, and then the Substrate PPP, maybe we go, well, if it's an easy enough upgrade, maybe we just try doing it, and we don't do the nice version, we just do this now reads URNs. Cool.
I mean,
Yeah,
that version is easy, that just switch into URNs. Then I'm happy to do it. But the nice fancy migration is a little bit more rough to do for all of them. So
yeah, makes sense. I guess yeah, it was kind of a combination of milestone / who's using stuff, which I think is related to deprecations. Any more topics? Any more thoughts on those two things? I think the milestone discussions or the batch change discussion was happening on a PR, right, as well. Can continue that there as well.
I guess also just in case there's anything else to say, I think that this is a question I'm going to have now, and maybe in general, in case there's any subsequent migrations, which is sort of the thing we're trying to figure out. But is the general consensus that just doing Substrate Go, Substrate Java, and Substrate RS, and then maybe Substrate Python and maybe Substrate C++, depending on how our exploration goes, is sufficient changes to account for a migration? Because there's a lot of repositories in the Substrate org, many of which I'm not sure exactly what they do. So I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of what the limit is before you can say the migration step is complete and you can move to the next part where you update the spec to remove the old thing.
Yeah,
Ideally, the
Substrate
validator gets updated.
Sorry, what was that?
Ideally, the validator gets updated.
Validator as well?
But the validator hasn't been updated in ages. It's a massive undertaking.
Oh, okay.
I think
So-
maybe to start
We
with,
shouldn't have
I'm
mentioned
gonna-
that second part. You're going to see if Ben just solved the problem, man.
So
No, that's his manager would be like, we got other fish to fry in the ecosystem before we fix that. I think actually, why don't I start with? I think something that might be good to do is I'll put a PR out to add like these are the libraries. These are what the Datadog is using as like a users, and I can make a request out to the mailing list to be like, hey, if you're actively using a library, please like add it to the website so we can say, hey, you're a big company using this, and we can know that we care about migrating you because like. There's also like Substrate C#, Substrate JS, Substrate Ruby, and I'm like, I don't know anyone who's using those. And
Exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And some of those
effectively,
haven't been updated
if
in
no
months.
one replies in the email about like what they're using, then it can be like, we're not going to prioritize migrating it. Cool.
and then there's DuckDB.
Should I add a second topic for that? No.
What about gluten? Isn't gluten supporting Substrate somehow?
Their fork is probably like a year and a half out of date.
And they're way forked. It's No, it's still a major effort to take care of.
Yeah, they hard forked it. I mean, in a perfect world, we would spend time trying to
Right.
get them back on main.
Yeah.
I tried to upgrade them
Spend
like
time,
6
and they're
months
just not
ago,
very
right?
helpful.
I didn't get much
What's that,
traction.
David?
I spent some time doing it for a while, fixing like 1 or 2 items a quarter. But I mean, that's why we have the CSV files, for instance.
Mm.
Yeah, I actually on that point. So, are you guys? I learned about. I didn't know about it before. There's a companion project to Velox called Verax. That was something I did not know. They're trying to build a new query optimizer, which is apparently it's open source as well. I was talking with one of the guys. I was there was a conference, so NorCal DB conference last week that I was at, and yeah, there's like, because I think Velox is interesting. Like, we've kind of had this sort of gluten kind of connection with Velox. Originally, Velox supported Substrate directly, and then like they kind of pulled it out and made it separate. And so it's basically just in gluten now. There's an interesting question of whether or not how we can try to engage there. It's connected to the topic about gluten, because it's like we're kind of like on the side there. Like, I mean, the biggest uses of Velox are actually via gluten. I think outside of Facebook. Like I think Microsoft's use of the for the Spark stuff is gluten based. I think a couple of the others are gluten based. So it's in our interest to try to be involved there, because I feel like if Velox talks to Velox using a new format, then now we've got competing formats, right? Because the Velox community generally hasn't directly adopted the Substrate stuff. It's only through hard fork inside of gluten. Be good for people to go look at that. I haven't actually looked at it yet. There was a talk about it, and so I learned a little bit about it. But yeah, I was just thinking like, if Velox talks to Velox using format foo, Vevox, I don't know, some other V name, then that then creates competition, which I mean could be good, but I think probably it's not great in this case. It's kind of like having 2 versions of Arrow or something like that. You're just like, oh, sucks. So we should try to figure out how to do that. I mean, I remember with Arrow, right? Velox came up with some great new ideas, and kind of had hard forked Arrow. And Wes and others worked hard to backport those things back into Arrow as new formats, because they were good ideas. So we should try to figure out how to get engaged with that.
My guess, like a good first question I think to ask, my guess would be that their internal plan representation is going to be the Velox physical plan. Which would probably also be their output as well. So then the question is like, how portable is that output? But if they want to make it composable, then in theory it should be portable. Like one of the big
I don't know. I don't know that they're thinking about it that way. I don't know.
Okay,
we didn't get into that level of detail.
Yeah, because like the DuckDB people love their mark join, and the Velox people see that as a bizarre way to solve the join problem. And so then it's sort of like, how do you solve this in an optimizer is always a good question, I think, to ask. It's like, what is
That also feels like the general problem of Substrate generally, which is everyone comes into this with their own expectations about what is and is not reasonable SQL and or relational plans. And it turns out it depends on whether you start with Postgres or MySQL or SQL Server, or coming at it from data frames, and everyone's got your own perspective on it.
Yeah.
This is really weird. Like, just as a quick note here, it's so confusing when you search for Verax on Google. It gives you a link which is Verax is a composable optimizer.
So it goes to Axiom, yeah.
And then it goes to Axiom. So I guess maybe they renamed it since Friday.
I think it
He's
says
also
Axiom is the
Googling
front
behind the
end.
scenes.
I think Axiom's the CLI or the front end.
Hmm.
Verax is it's where you type in the SQL. Verax turns the SQL
Yeah.
into a plan.
No, but the weird
There is
the
a
weird
commit
part is
where they
that
did
the link.
Eric's Axiom.
Yeah, they renamed it last week.
Hmm.
Okay.
Gotcha. Cool. I'm going to
That's
try and get us
crazy, 'cause-
back on track a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. All right.
No, you're good. You're good. We got a lot.
Hmm.
The next item was actually just a reminder. I think I posted about proposing new committers at SMC. I think both Jackson West and you both replied to it. I think we can probably open up the vote now as well for it. I can just open it up today. And if, I guess, yeah, SMC members could apply their votes. I would like to get that in this week. So that'd be good. Yeah, that's just a reminder. I have the next item, I'm going to punt it for later because I think it's a more open topic. Young Troll.
Yeah, so the type alias support, the first PR, the main PR was in, and then there's something closed over, which is supporting the literal.
Mhm.
So I opened the PR. Please take a look. There, like the proposal is essentially having the separate user-defined literal or type alias based literal that so there's an existing user-defined literal, and then there's a type alias defined literal. So that's the path I chose. But please take a look. There are like multiple ways to do this. So I just want to get your opinions. That's the one. The fetch rail, I think it's a time to bring it up again. I don't know, like how old is this?
Yeah, no, it's probably time to revise the conversation.
Yeah. So
speaking of deprecation, should we just get rid of fetch rail and merge it into sort rail? And just, I understand why Calcit does it. We keep having discussions about should these be separate, and maybe they shouldn't be.
maybe, yeah.
I have always thought that Calcite got it wrong, so I'm on the other side. Yeah, yeah. I'm one person though. I'm not gonna like die on that grade. It's just weird to me. It's like people run the query select star limit 10 all of the time.
Yeah.
And so having an order by or a sort rel in that plan makes zero sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's what I think about it. But
fetch itself is fine.
I think what I'll say is actually this has been long enough since I looked at this, and maybe we just look at it offline and
maybe
load it back in.
Yeah, in offline, just take another look and see what you're thinking.
Yeah. Awesome.
So those two reminder. I have a small update on my side about the collation support. I am looking into a little more deeply about the collation world of collation, which I want to leave, and I don't know. I like undo whatever thing, but basically my thinking is along this line. So this the ICU have this Unicode collation algorithm thing, so which is extremely customizable. But at least everyone else is just picking up that reference implementation and then just adopt it. The other problem is everyone packaging it slightly differently. So that brings into at least one big chunk of collation world is represented by this ICU library. So one clear thing is we need to somehow factor out this ICU library customization point in some sort of definition, so that if any consumer that rely on that ICU library could basically interpret the correct collation customization there. So that's one line of thought, and this actually maybe covers vast majority. And then there's the Unix world. Unix or POSIX, this old style libc style collation thing. I haven't given like much thought about those, but that's another big chunk of collation world. The other is I just clump it as the rest of the world. Like I don't know. I don't want to know what they are doing. I just do whatever you want. we'll just clump through whatever identifier you're using, and I don't care really. Like just do, if you understand it, awesome, great. But yeah, so I think those two basically, the ICU is definitely, from the compatibility perspective, that is definitely one that we must go after. The other slowly, I mean, the other big chunk is this like POSIX and the libc style, which has been sitting there for a while in open source. So there are lots of systems that are using it. So that is another thing. I'm just purposely neglecting Windows because there's some internal discussion about the collation stuff. So yeah, but
Yeah.
we
I mean, Windows has been around for a while too, I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's been there like while, but yeah, but there's some like other discussion, internal discussion is going on about the collation. So I want to just get more picture, more precise picture on that.
I guess there's a world where we try and like right off the bat define every possible type of collation, and I think that sets us up for the situation that you're in, Young-Chul, which is there's infinite ways to do it, and realistically, anything that we choose is going to be wrong for some system. So maybe what we should way to simplify the problem is pick a canonical standard as like if you're using standard plans, you can use this, but there's also a mechanism to bring your own collations. In the same way that this has come up for us a little bit with regexes, where the standard library defines ICU regexes as like the standard of the functions that we use. We actually straight up FFI'd the C library into like Java and Rust for a bunch of internal stuff to be able to meet that standard. And that actually just worked out from the perspective of we want these paths to run anywhere. And I don't know if you've ever tried to like standardize between Postgres and Trino and Data Fusion regexes. They're all a nightmare. We just FFI'd it. And maybe something like that might be the best way to kind of approach this from the like general, like if you want to use Substrait stuff, just like FFI the ICU library. It's another open standard. We're using an open standard. If you can map your thing to the open standard, great. If not, we can let you define custom collations.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with the first half of Victor's statement, which is I don't think that we're going to be able to write down all of the things. That being said, I kind of feel like the like giving it a pattern similar to the extension name pattern, right? Where it's like, hey, we have some namespaces that we own, like Substrate : and Substrate : means ICU. But if we also want to support Windows, we just say, okay, that's Windows : and it's the Windows name. And if you want to support, joe.com, then, you put com.joe : my name in there.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you can use your mechanism that you're talking about, where you replace extension with collation io.substrate, the thing, and then collation com.microsoft or whatever.
Yeah. Something like that, because I kind of feel like these things are well defined, right? Like in any of these systems where you have a collation, that collation is fully defined, right? Like you go to any of the SQL Server collations and you know exactly what it's doing. The
only problem is the customization. I mean, there are like predefined collations, but you can customize it.
That seems
define customize.
The customized,
you're like customized like the trailing space thing or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Like you can just mix and match. Like this thing, like it's a universal algorithm, so it just handle like variety of scenario. This is because it's a universal algorithm.
so there are several universal algorithms that each have their own customization properties. Is that fair?
Well,
or is it just ICU?
It is the ICU thing. The ICU has a Unicode collation algorithm, universal collation algorithms, and that has a bunch of customization point. And then just throw a pepper on it. It has a versions. The algorithm evolve the version has a different capability.
Well, actually, we could put yeah.
Hey,
Sorry.
there's a sort here. It depends on this Unicode like collation database, and this database.
Do they have a
also-
do they have a string representation of the collation,
They do.
including all the like the versioning and the customizations?
And as far as I know, it's just a weird string representation, but it doesn't include the version.
Okay.
And the other problem is that whatever packaging is like that, even that string representation is somewhat different from system to system. I don't know why the world is in this state, but I mean, if you're using that library, just use that library. Like, why are you inventing like something new? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, my inclination would be is that we have a string, and there's some places where the string has structure, and then there's open to customization if you have your own collations or whatnot.
Yeah,
Like some pattern like that.
Well, that's one option, but I generally. I'm more inclined to having, if you have information as a structure, then let's just express that structure in a structured way rather than just having this string. So that's
I mean, I think if you can come up with a way that works, then great. It just sounded like the way, like I'm like, if there are like 6 properties, are we going to have a structure that's for ICU collation that's larger than the rest of the proto definitions combined? Is what it sounded like you were describing. Like we're gonna have like ICU v1, ICU v2, ICU v3, and each have their different sets of fields for the customizations. So I don't know how big that becomes. My thought is that if it becomes really big, then like just be like, okay, that's an opaque thing that ICU library understands, and we don't care.
Yeah. So that's something I don't know. Again, we need to see. It's maybe just string and then okay, just to refer to this like spec somewhere on the internet, and then just we just follow that encoding, like go read it. Maybe that's the way to go, but I haven't actually finished my completed research. So as I make progress, I'll keep this forum
I think
updated.
a little write up on it might be useful as well, because I realized you lost me about 5 minutes ago in terms of wait, how many collations? What? Okay, no, like where is this going?
I will. I mean, this is like just giving you like just small like bubble update, and then I definitely, this is something that we need to actually open an issue and then write up or track some detail of the reasonings and decisions and so on.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And the thing to remember is, and this is the one that always gets me, is that collation not only influences greater than and less than, but also equal to.
Right. Yeah.
The quality changes with different collations.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Well, I don't know if that was a small update, but thank you for updating us on your continued nightmare about learning about collations. I look forward to learning more about this.
I need to share my pain.
Staring into the ocean.
We appreciate your work.
Once you make a PR, we'll share your pain.
Then you can add like collation expert to your resume and be like,
No. I don't want
Make yourself entirely unhireable there.
Change your
We'll start-
LinkedIn title to
we'll start
collation.
substrate collation, which is the whole representation language for collations. Anyway, speaking of something entirely different, Ben, blob storage.
Yeah. I mean, all of the discussions kind of before about the bulk stuff was really in the context of the discussion of this particular issue about representing blob storage. I basically just, for context, opened an issue where it's kind of a little ambiguous in the spec right now what a local file is. And my proposal is to, instead of having local files, have something that's actually allowed to be remote. So you could tell based off of the schema of the URI what kind of file it is. Like, for example, something stored in S3. And there was good discussion after that. But as just the most easy first step with no migration pain or anything involved, My proposal is just to update the documentation to reflect that this is an appropriate usage of local files, and then we can continue to have a discussion about whether or not we actually want to change the protos themselves in some way that actually better reflects the usage of this local files bit. And I guess I'm getting a temperature check here on if people feel similarly or not.
Because you're trying to generalize the concept of, it turns out that local files are really useful, but sometimes you want local files to be a thing in S3, which isn't really local, but it's still just a file. So maybe we should just have
well,
Or-
if you read it as locally accessible as opposed to locally stored, you're saying it's locally accessible, right?
Yeah,
The only problem is the authentication issues.
Is your S3 library available locally? Then sure, local, it's a local.
But David, you said there's
That's fine.
your point is an authentication issue potentially.
I mean,
So well, the other question is that what's the definition right now around the path? Is it like, is the expectation, I just don't even remember, and how do people use it? Like, is it, everybody expects it's going to be a leading slash?
Path type URI that can refer to either a single folder or a single file. Oh, there's a path type. There's URI path glob, URI file, URI folder.
Because
it
URI.
seemed ambiguous to me. That was part of the problem. It just says URI, which to me, URI, okay, can I put any scheme?
Yeah.
You know,
For
or is it
whatever
just
scheme you
file?
want.
And is like grabbing URI entire code base and then
I think it's totally.
Yeah.
I think like, yeah, I think it's a good update to say like, yeah, this may be a like the local file is a little bit of a misnomer in that it may actually be something that's locally accessible, but is actually remote.
You might
That's
be able to change changing the message name might be backwards compatible in both JSON and protobuf flow. The field names aren't, but the message name is.
Not
Yeah,
in
but the
JSON,
problem is the
right?
field name.
Is the field name file or file path?
yeah, local file, I think.
The field name and message type are both local file,
Hmm.
or it might be like local file, local files. So it might be clunky to change one and not the other.
Yeah.
So
I want to actually before I get to, I think I have a suggestion for that. But David, you had a thing about authentication that you brought up that I think was relevant.
Well, I mean, it's like you can throw the authentication often in the URL, but it's not necessarily secure. But I think if we're going to be putting it in the plan anyway, if you were thinking of putting the authentication in the plan, it's still going to be.
And if your system cares about it, you can also throw it in an enhancement. Be like, hey, like authentication is going to be specific to your system and however you've chosen to do it to some extent. So like you can message an S3 blob. We haven't put authentication in this. That's an execution concern. That's very system dependent.
Yeah, there's a lot of that's just a slippery slope anyway, even if it wasn't security concern, because then you have like timeouts and all kinds of settings that you will need when you're interacting with object storage. I mean,
But it's generally speaking, I think that in a large portion of cases, ignoring the like self-signed URLs, which then are fine, or like not self-signed, pre-signed URLs for like S3 or something like that, which in that case, those are, time limited. So it's fine, or it's generally fine. But in most systems, these are environmental concerns, right? Like they're not.
I'd say in most of those systems, you're specifying a manifest path and not a list of files anyway. Like it's pretty. I don't know how many. I can see it would be useful, but like I don't know how many systems want the whole manifest of files to be in the plan. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying that, like authentication stuff, timeouts, that kind of stuff is generally suited in higher. In the same way that like how much memory is this plan going to use or whatever.
Or a registry, like here's all the object storage you can match to. When you get a URI that matches this pattern, look up this connection or build this connection.
Yeah, I think it sounds like people are probably in agreement that local files S3 makes sense, and maybe we need to figure out a way to represent it. And maybe the dumbest way is just make another message type where we copy and deprecate the old one and be like, hey, here's the new one, here's all the new fields. Because I do find that the migrations where it's like in this one message in this processing, do something slightly different. It's a lot harder than like, here's a new thing, reuse most of the old processing, but like the name has changed. Like that might be nicer to just do it that way, because I think that migration would be easier than like the name has changed. There's a new field, check the new field versus like entirely new message type. Old one's going away, switch to the new one. It's pretty straightforward.
I mean, the reason why I was hesitant to do the rename is because other people raise substantive comments about the existing structure of those messages that might later warrant more fleshing out of how we want those protos to actually look. And rather than just do a migration just for a name change and then later do a migration that is a content change, my thinking was, let's just change the documentation to reflect how people actually can use this thing. And when we actually have the substantive part of the proto change fleshed out, then we can do the more painful migration, but in one step.
I'm also on board for that, especially if we make an issue and just link it in the protos to be like, hey, here's what this is how we interpret this. Also, we have a plan to make this better.
Yeah. Or like a concept plan, really.
A plan for a plan.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, blob storage. I guess next one is Substrate Java release failing. I guess Ben, you put this on, but I can talk about this. I've been looking at it.
Yeah.
Part of it is that we think that we suspect the J release upgrade and Substrate Java just broke the releases. We think we have a workaround. And then the other thing I've been trying to do is automate the releases so that they can run with branch protections on. I've been turning them off while I run the release manually for the last last month. But I'm trying to get it done because I'm going away for a month, and I was honestly just going to turn them off while I was gone if I hadn't fixed it. But that might work. But one thing that is kind of weird that happened is the last release failed. Okay, because the semantic release happened separately from the Maven push, we released like a version of Substrate Java, and then the push to Maven failed, so we have like version tags that aren't in Maven, which isn't really a problem. I'm trying to just release the next version so that we just go to 68 directly and skip 67, which doesn't exist in Maven. That might be fine. I would like to figure out how to publish those versions specifically if possible, but I'm not super concerned about it. I guess, Ben, you brought this up for a specific reason.
I mean, you covered it. If
Okay.
it's a solved thing, it's a solved thing. I just wanted to make sure it went said if there was something that someone else could provide context on.
Yeah. And yeah, if I don't figure out the automation before I go on leave, I'm just going to turn off the branch protection like it was before. You still have to be a committer to do merges, but now you don't have to wait for the CI.
I think we all have worked on Java and we all don't anymore.
I still work on Java. I just don't look at the build that much. The good news is the IBM folks, like Niels and a bunch of folks there, are very big Java heads, and they're already looking at it as well. So maybe they'll sort it out. That's my hope. Cool. But yeah, that should happen. Yeah, then I had the next item actually, which is on aggregate relations of grouping columns, specifically like handling different group encodings. And by this I don't, or grouping column encodings. By this I don't mean like roll up and stuff. I mean that. So Substrate defines if you have like multiple groupings, you add a column where the value in that column is like a positional index into the grouping ID, right? So if it's 0, it's the first one, it's 2. Other systems define their own grouping schemes. Like the one I've come up with this scene is like DataFusion and TrinoSQL both. Actually, not talking about Trino, but DataFusion has like their grouping column. They have one, except it's a bit mask into like the grouping IDs. Mm-hmm. And the caveat now is if I'm taking like a Substrate plan and mapping it into DataFusion with an aggregate, I actually can sort of do that mapping where I can map the aggregate into DataFusion, add a project on top where I would transform their bit masking into like the expected Substrate index thing. However, if I have like a DataFusion aggregate with a grouping ID, I can't represent that as an aggregate rel because there's no way to be like, hey, it's like a Substrate grouping, except the grouping column is different. And I can't do the trick where I like expand it into two things because in Substrate it's one thing. Does that make sense?
Is that an arbitrarily long bitmap?
Maybe.
No, I'm
just
reflecting on that representation because I'm like, is it you can only have up to 64 groupings?
Potentially.
Or,
I haven't actually looked at
is
the
it an integer
implementation
type
side.
or?
Actually, from what I've seen, it expands to up to I64, I think. Because I think I was making look at it was a switch statement for depending on how many grouping columns you have, it defines like the width of that thing. And that's a separate question about like, oh, if you have a really big grouping, will DataFusion blow up? And I'm like, I can't get groupings with two grouping sets working right now correctly, technically. I'll deal with 64 later, and then maybe yell at people doing that. But I suspect we might need some kind of mechanism in the aggregate rel to change how that grouping column is represented, if that makes sense, to handle different systems. The bitmask one actually does seem pretty common. I need to double check how many things are doing it. I think Trino does it internally, as does Data Fusion. I think a couple other places.
Snowflake is doing bitmask, I think.
Yeah. Basically, the bitmask one seems to be the most common one that people use.
Yeah.
And the like index into a grouping thing is less common. But effectively, the problem remains the same: is that there are systems that do different things. We can't
Right.
encode that in a single aggregation relation because there's no way to like right now change what that does. And mapping to the system works because you can put a project on it to make the plan look like what Substrate expects, but there's no way to map that into Substrate directly or indirectly, really. Yeah. Just something I'm bringing up. In practice, I think most systems aren't handling grouping sets correctly at all, because they're not adding that extra column. Actually, there's a bug in Data Fusion where it adds it in the middle between the groupings and then the grouping ID column and then the expressions or the measures, which also screws up the conversion. I filed a bug for that, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm as excited about this as collations, really. No, I think it makes sense. I think that it's like collations. It's like we have to go and be like, okay, let's have rigor around what are the common representations, and then make a decision. Do we have a a closed set of things that we list as alternatives, or do we try to build something that's more extensible that someone can add their own?
Yeah.
I'm hoping it's the former as opposed to the latter, as opposed to collations, which is probably the latter, or at least partly the latter. But yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think that but you're going to have to define the schema, right? Like if you do 2 grouping sets and you get a smaller integer type than if you do 25, we've got to define that in there, and that's going to probably get a little bit nasty because I'm assuming that these systems are not going to return the same data types for different sizes of grouping sets, even if they have bitmaps.
Yeah.
Because I bet you Postgres just returns like an arbitrary number size. I guess Oracle has that too. It's just like number without a digits, or without the like constraint.
There's a world where we just define this as a scalar function, that the default one, the grouping set ID function, that has our behavior, and you can say aggregate relation, use the scalar function for grouping set ID, and it's the standard one, and then define common ones like the bitmask ones, and then if your system is really special, you define a separate one. But I'll think about this. But I generally
the challenge with that is that you then have to define what is the input type to the function if it's a function. Right, like we don't have because we don't. I mean, otherwise we have to define some kind of contextual concept, which I don't even know what that would be.
Yeah.
Right, like the input type, I guess, would be like true, false for all of the grouping columns. Right, for all the grouping sets. Right, be like a variadic function with grouping sets, but then you can't implement the current version, which is right, like which is numbered differently than like it's not inherent.
No, I see what you mean. But it's like this. So it's not really a scalar function. It's a scalar function that only makes sense in the context of like an aggregate, and you could say that the input groupings are inputs to the function, or you could just say, hey, this function runs in a grouping context. The output value is the row for each row is some calculation based on the inputs. But there's a lot of room for exploration in this space. It sounds like people agree this is a problem that we need to solve, or that it's a problem. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do have 1 minute, but we can talk about embedded pickle functions if people want.
I saw a discussion about embedded functions on the list, and I just wanted to. We had a long conversation about this. Someone was working on it, I can't seem to find the issue. I feel like Weston, you were on the ticket discussing it as well, where we were trying to talk about how we would do embedded functions with Python. But I don't know where it is. Maybe it's in the Python repo, and that's why I haven't found it yet. But if someone else remembers that and remembers where the hell we had it, it'd be good to add it to that Slack thread that's talking about embedded functions. Because the big question that I recall us being challenged by is, how do you define, do you need to define the environment with which this function could operate or not? And that was kind of, I was arguing that you should, and people who know Python better than me was like, that's fucking crazy. I think that was my recollection of the discussion, but I can't find it. So if someone remembers where it is and can find it, it would be good to share that with whoever it was that was asking about it on the Slack thread. That was also
the reason that I was looking at that, Fred, was I think they were talking that this is actually in the expressions one-off, and like from what I saw, it was added about 4 years ago as part of like the original like Substrate stuff. And in my head, it's like, it's not wired in. I don't know anyone who's using it. It seems a little underbaked in terms of like, to your point, how does this run? And my default reaction was like, do less, delete it. If someone wants it, they can come and propose it again. There's a certain amount of like this stuff on there that like no one seems to be using. And I'd rather delete it. And if someone comes yelling at us, I'm like, you're the person that cares about this. Please tell us how you're using it and maybe specify it better. I think maybe that's part of the 1.0 is like, what are people actually using, and what are things that are just vestigial that like are nice to haves, but no one's really owning them and making sure that they work fully.
Yeah, I agree. Heard Ben's point too. Like there were like 5 different definitions of what an embedded function should be. And I remember like being a little surprised by I had this thing. It's like, oh, obviously it's XYZ, and then maybe Jacques said, well, no, I was thinking this, and then someone else was like, I had this other idea. It was like it's a SQL script or something. So
yeah. I mean, some related topic would be embedded function in Substrate. I mean, Substrate scale expression as an embedded function. So that is either basically try to save the inlining the scale expressions. So we just have one definition and then just reference this like internal like Substrate thing. I don't know, like basically we need to define some sort of like bindings, parameter bindings to that inline functions, but I haven't think through how to do it, but maybe that's something I should open a ticket and then hash up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Yeah. Bye.
Everyone.